Good morning, Liberty North AP and dual credit Psych students. Today is Virtual Wednesday, February 24th, and today we are starting Unit 9, which is Development. We are actually going to take a big chunk out today. So we're going to do learning targets numbers 1 through 8 today. And I have the notes on the board, so they'll be in the video. Obviously, I sent them out via Twitter on the announcement for kind of the schedule for today. And then I'm also going to put them on Canvas once we're done today, okay? Your AP learning targets are also on Canvas, all right? So they're listed. All right, here's just a copy that you'll have in class over the next week and a half as we go through it. They'll be on your desk as well, so you can take a picture of it with your phone, all right? And I'll be reading them as we go. But here is, there are 16 total. So we're going to do half today, and then half on the Virtual Wednesday next week, because we have 2 5-day weeks. So that's going to help us get through this unit a little bit quicker. So we can do the note days on our Virtual Wednesdays, and then we can do activities, videos, and so on and so forth, and apply the information on the class periods, okay? Which we will have a lot of fun, because we'll be playing some children's games in class. So I know students always love those, going back to your childhood, okay? All right, so let's go. So I've got, again, the learning targets listed in red, the information in black and green, and then I'll move the camera over when we go to 5, 6, 7, and 8 over there, okay? All right, so number 1, learning target number 1 is explain the process of conception and gestation, including factors that influence successful prenatal development, okay? All right, so what they want you to know is kind of the 3 main stages involved in conception and gestation, and that is zygote, embryo, fetus. Okay, so that's the order that it goes. This is like the first 2 weeks, and then they kind of go in 2-week increments here. Okay, so this is how basically the fetus, the child, develops in the womb. Okay. Now, what they also really want you to know, and what's important here, is that the nature and nurture starts there. So obviously nature is there with the heredity and the genetics as the child is developing in the womb, but also know that nurture starts here. So, it's critically important to remember that both of them start. So, things that the mother does, toxins from outside, chemicals that the mother puts in her body, I know that probably all of you have heard, various things like that you can read to your child. So some mothers will read to their child in the womb. They can interact with the child in the womb later on in development. They can tell how active it is, so on and so forth. So just keep in mind that's a pretty important element there. Okay. All right. So factors that can increase and decrease development are with nature and nurture starting here. So if there's anything that can negatively impact with genetics, heredity, also environment. Okay, so again, that, the mother's temperament, the mother's schedule, what the mother puts in her body, those all are nurture influences that begin early on as well. Okay, and then AP learning target number 2 and some of number 6 here. Okay, so obviously the critical topic in development that's going to keep coming up and up is nature and nurture. Okay, so again, nature, genetics, heredity, nurture is the environment. And obviously they both, again, impact development, right? So again, in psychology, we know it's not nature versus nurture. They both impact, it's just which one is the bigger player, okay? And in development, that's a pretty hot topic. I think the book takes a more nature approach. So the book takes more of the development has a high heritability factor, which means the genetics are more of a player. But it also, as you read the book, you can kind of see that there are also major environmental things that can influence development. So, okay. All right. So just some examples that they list on early on. So some nature, maturation, which is basically development is as we change over time. Maturation is biologically programmed growth. Right, so you kind of have development, which is kind of the overall how we change and develop over time. Maturation is the part of that that's biological, it's pre-programmed, okay? So, throughout the developmental period, especially early on, we have biologically programmed growth periods. For motor skills, we have an order. You might go through them at different times, but you're going to go through them in the same order. Like, we're all going to hopefully learn to walk successfully. I think the average is 9 to 12 months. So we'll do it at different times, depending on the nurture, our environment, but we will go in the same order as we develop the walk. So same thing with motor skills. You're going to go gross, then you're going to go fine. Okay, it's programmed growth. Okay. We have critical periods. So we know that the brain aligns with what we call critical periods, which means that at certain ages of development, the brain is focused on this area. So like language, motor skills, it kind of progresses. So, there's a lot of critical periods in that ages birth to 7, which we've talked about, especially in language, motor development, developing trust, attachment. I mean, it's like the brain is programmed to grab onto those things and really develop those concepts, those skills, those abilities in what we call critical periods. And if the critical period is influenced by something negative from the outside or skipped, then it creates issues that are lasting. Okay. Obviously, then going back to conception and gestation. Okay. And then heredity. So obviously with our genes. Okay. Nurture, you've got cultural influences on development. So culture, again, as we talk about, shapes everything. Society, culture really impacts what's trendy, when you're a new mother. So, mothers will read books like what should they do? Should they read to their child in the womb? Should they avoid this? Should they take prenatal vitamins? There's culture really kind of shifts, but kind of, should they listen to Mozart music in the womb? Okay. Parenting style, which we'll talk about on AP Learning Track number 7. So, how your parents parent you, raise you, obviously impacts. Teratogens, which are toxins. So if the mother smokes, if the mother drinks, is involved in drug use, could be on certain medication. If they live in an environment where there's pollution in the air, those toxins, which are teratogens, can enter the womb. Okay. And then obviously your environment, which is a smaller subset of your culture. Well, actually, sorry, culture is a smaller subset of your environment. Environment's all encompassing. Okay. All right. AP Learning Target number 3 is discuss maturation of motor skills. Okay. So again, the development of motor skills is maturation. So it's biologically governed by the brain. Okay. And there are critical periods. All right. So, but generally what you kind of need to know from the book is that we develop our gross motor first, and then we develop our fine motor. So gross motor is the ability to move the big muscles. So again, if you have contact with an infant, early on, they just struggle to have complete control over their limbs and their legs. So, the ability just to, you see a baby just kicking in its baby seat, arms are flailing, legs are moving, they learn to move the big muscles first, and then you learn to coordinate those big muscles into fine motor. Okay. Now, I should also put in here reflexes because reflexes obviously are biologically programmed at birth. So, babies are born with reflexes, so they can grasp, even though that kind of appears like it's a fine motor. They are programmed with reflexes at the beginning, which is what, again, as soon as a baby's born, the nurses will take it, weigh it, measure it, and then they're also going to test to make sure that it has some of its gross motor, but also that it has reflexes, because they're checking for that motor development. Okay. All right, AP Learning Chart number 4. Jump down here. Which says, describe the influence of temperament and social factors on attachment and socialization. Okay, so a big part of maturation, okay, is socialization and attachment. So again, we are social animals, so this is biological. Okay, so we need to learn to socialize and to be able to attach, because if we don't, then we'll be isolated, and then generally survival is decreased a little bit. Okay, so things that impact your socialization ability and your attachment ability are your temperament, which we believe is biological. So this is kind of a personality trait that's a core trait. You can see it in the infants at birth. Are they reactive? Are they patient? You kind of you get the chill babies, and then the babies that are very, reactive to everything. So that's your temperament. Trust, again, which we'll talk about, and learning target number 6, and identity and self-concept are all part of Erikson's psychosocial stages of development. So these are all things that you need that help you socialize and attach. So I need to learn trust of other people, and mainly that starts again with my parents. Okay, I need to have a clear idea and concept of myself, who I am, what I stand for, and then that goes along with your identity. Okay, I need to have a strong identity of who I am. Who are my parents? Who are my friends? What do I like to do? Okay, and make sure that we have those, as those will help us socialize. But the first step of socialization is attachment. I have to learn to attach, which is impacted by trust. So, I think we will attach to something. I think, we've all seen the stories of in the wild where, animals will attach to each other. And even if it's wrong, so gazelles will attach to lions or lionesses in the wild. They don't generally end very well, but they just know that if they're by themselves, if they're isolated, that their chance of survival is negatively impacted. Okay, so socialization is important, and so is attachment, because this helps us socialize. All right, and then these are the early on impacts on both of those. Okay. All right, so let's move over to here. Ugh. All right, so we've got up here, what we've got going on is the important names. Okay, so number 5 is your historical figures. So identify the contributions of major researchers in development, and that's actually also number 13 and number 9. Okay, so I've kind of got them all in here, and I'll put that when we go over the other ones. So I've got 7 names here. The book has more, but these are kind of the ones that the book really focuses on. So you've got, and some of these you should already have in your AP notebook. So I'll put it like this for number 1 here real quick so you can see them all. So we have Albert Bandura, which we've already talked about, did the famous Bobo doll experiment. Okay. And he is the father of social learning theory, which again is the idea that my cognitive factors and my environment and me and my behavior all interact together. Okay. So it's basically kind of the cognitive behavioral theory. We got Gatsky, who is, and Piaget are big cognitive development guys. So we'll talk about Piaget's cognitive development theory down here. That's the one that the book spends the most time on. And then also we have, Gatsky is also known for cognitive and language. So he basically said that as our language develops, so does our mind. Okay. Erikson is social development, which we talked about. So he has his 8 stages of psychosocial development. Kohlberg is moral development theory. There are 3 levels there. And these 3, 4, and 5 are on Canvas with charts for their own picks from the book and their page numbers, which we'll go through here, a couple of them. Harry Harlow is attachment, historically known for attachment. He did experiments on rhesus monkeys, which there's some pictures in your book. And then, of course, Freud, who's the father of psychoanalysis, and his psychosexual stages of development theory. Okay. All right. So those are your big names. Okay. So there's 7 of them. All right. Okay. All right. And then what we have is AP learning target number 6, which we kind of already talked about, which again is nature nurture, but specifically it's with social development. And so on page 520 and also in Canvas, you have Erikson's psychosocial stages of development. Okay. And what Erikson basically said is we're going to develop through 8 stages of social development. And each stage is a conflict that we must resolve. And the interesting thing about Erikson's stage, though, is that the conflict can be resolved good or bad. and you're moving on. So the very first one actually is developing trust, basic trust, which then kind of sets the foundation and the stage for you to be able to socialize and develop socially. But in stage one, if you don't have the right environment, you will develop mistrust, and then you're moving on. And so basically he said that, in each of these 8 stages, you had a good and a bad, and you developed one or the other, and then you moved on. So you didn't stay at stage 1 until you developed trust. If you develop mistrust, you moved on. And obviously that would impact negatively your socialization process. And then Erickson said, once you get to stage 8 or later on in life, then you will go back as you become aware of issues. So if I have trust issues later on in life and I can't really forge healthy relationships, then I'm going to be motivated to go back and fix that. Okay. All right. So, and we'll talk about that more in class because that's a big one. AP learning target number 7 is parenting styles. So there are basically 3 major parenting styles. There are authoritarian, which is kind of like it's a dictatorship. Rules are set and they're expected to be followed with no question. Okay. There are permissive parents, which are, I think we call today in our society and culture, they're labeled the parents that just want to be friends. So they're very permissive, they're very passive, they pretty much leave development to the child. There's not a lot of guidance necessarily, except they just want to always have it be a positive relationship, more like a friendship and not like a parent to child relationship. And then there is authoritative, in which the parents take, this is probably the one that the book would recommend. Authoritative, which is basically where there are rules, the parents are ahead of the household, but there is explanation, there's talking, there's discussion, there's conversations about reasons, and so it's more of a democracy, if you will, here, but you do have the parents that take on the lead role of the family. Okay. There are all kinds of negative impacts that result from this type, and even this type, but most in studies and research, most of your healthy children who then socialize and become productive members of society and are successful come from authoritative households. Okay. And then AP learning target number 8 is cognitive development, which is, again, how our minds develop, how we develop to think. Which is very, very fascinating. We're going to spend time on this as well because this is a big one. This is probably the biggest theory in the entire book. It's the cornerstone. So this is Piaget. Okay, so Jean Piaget is ranked, I think, in psychology as the 2nd most influential psychologist of all time. Piaget was also a prodigy. He was very, very brilliant. And what he did is he just studied children, and he gave children problems and put them in situations, and then basically just learned that infants think differently than we do, and our thinking changes over time. Okay, which is very important to remember. I know that I'm teaching psychology, but I think differently than you guys do because your brains are still developing. Mine is developed. In elementary school, you thought differently than you did in middle school. In middle school, you thought differently than you do now. I mean, hopefully you understand and can verify that, but you are different and you think differently. And if you have access to an infant and you can be around an infant, then you're going to know that's probably pretty true. Okay, very accurate. So on page 483 in the book and in Canvas, I've got, and actually with this one, I've got detailed notes with the theory. So to understand Piaget, you're going to need to go to Canvas and page 483. But actually Canvas, I've got the whole theory written down with notes. It's pretty complex. But the idea there is that we progress through 4 stages of thinking or of mental processes. In each stage, our brain is making more connections, more parts of our brains are developing, so we're able to think in more complex concepts, ideas, and then of course we'll watch some of the very famous Piaget tests that kind of prove and verify that. We'll watch some videos on that as well. Okay. All right. So again, Erickson and Piaget are your big ones that are on Canvas. With your books, you need to stop and make sure that those are there. Kohlberg will be another one. Here are your kind of 7 big names that you need to know. Okay. And then actually, these are the longest. So learning targets 1 and 8. There's a lot of duplicate stuff in the second half, learning targets 9 through 16. So I think 2 of those are names, which I think I've covered most of them here that you need to know for the unit. So, okay. All right, so if you have any questions, let me know, but make sure you get this information, and then we'll kind of be going over it and applying it Thursday, Friday, and then next week, okay? All right, if you have any questions, remember I'm on Zoom the rest of the periods today, and then I'll do another video session at 1 o'clock. Okay, have a good virtual Wednesday.